Oh, this must be the podcast.
My name is Mariano Vara, to distinguish from my dad, who I am named after. Those of us who are not quite juniors, because the name's not exactly the same. I have a middle initial of J, which is always funny because the J stands for Jesus. So unfortunately, once, first, second grade, I blurted out when the teacher asked everybody their middle names. I said Jesus in English, very innocently. And everybody was very shocked. So.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to This Must Be the Podcast. This is the first episode of 2017. I know, it's nearly 5 months in, but better late than never, right? My guest today is Mariano Vara, a psychotherapist and a fan of my anti-conspiracy work. We met up on Facebook discussing the assassination of President Kennedy in one of the groups we both belong to. I've been largely avoiding those conversations lately. I get sick of answering the same questions and addressing the same lies and misconceptions over and over again. Most of all, I can't stand the willful ignorance of some people who wish to pretend that their opinion is just as valid as mine, even when we're talking about questions of fact and matters of logic, not opinion. Anywho, Skirdo. Getting back to my guest, Mariano immigrated to America with his parents from Cuba during a very difficult period of our history.
I came in May of 1968, May 14th. And the reason that's pertinent to my story is because right after that, 2.5, 3 weeks, Bobby Kennedy was killed. And I was able to witness that, if you will, secondhand on TV. The funeral in New York City, the train procession to Arlington. And it really broke my heart as a little kid. I was 6. I had turned 6 in February of that year. And it brought back memories of my hearing about JFK's death inadvertently from my dad, whatever, age 4, age 5. And I was confused at first. And I said, wait a minute, I thought that this had been like a long time ago. And my parents explained, no, this is the brother of that other Kennedy, President Kennedy. And I said, so they killed him too? And, it was very sad for me. And subsequently, I learned that 6 weeks or so previous to our arrival, Martin Luther King had been killed. I didn't really know him at the time. The Democratic National Convention was in Chicago later that summer. As you know, it's been described as a police riot. Protesters were beaten up. And of course, then we got the Vietnam War in the background. We've got Watergate by the time I'm 10, the beginnings of it. Nixon resigning when I'm about 12. Church committee, Rockefeller Commission, and I was a square kid, and I did tune into all this because, it's my adopted country.
As confused and crazy as those events must have been for a young refugee, he knew he was far better off here than what he had left behind. A nearly Stalinist state, as Mariano describes it, where his father was in fear for his life because of his divergent political views, and his mother knew she was in trouble because she was a Jehovah's Witness.
And the religion was persecuted, and the Jehovah's Witnesses were horribly persecuted in Cuba, tortured and so forth. And they considered the religion, to some extent, accurately, obviously, American origins, but they basically considered it some kind of potential CIA American spy type of thing. So it was banned eventually.
For the record, the Jehovah's Witness community was founded generations before the CIA even existed. But this is the conspiracy theorist mentality, and governments are prone to it every bit as much as individuals are. Mariano's interest in President Kennedy and the assassination began when he first heard his father talk about it while they still lived in Cuba.
I guess I started by believing it was Oswald, then slowly drifted into believing it was a conspiracy of at some level.
What makes Mariano's experience very different from my own, and most of the people I have met, is that he was looking at the assassination through the lens of the Cuban exile community in Miami. It's a perspective that I knew about, but hadn't really thought about before this.
I guess I really believed, given significant time of my childhood and adolescence in Miami, and exposed without, stereotyping every Cuban exile in Miami by no means, but exposed to the right-wing elements in Miami, the terrorism, the actual violence by many Cuban exiles towards moderates, other Cuban exiles, and actually meeting a few folks, including some Bay of Pigs Brigade members. There was a lot of animosity in Miami towards JFK. Basically, a stupendous misunderstanding on the part of exiles. He's the only president, whether morally right, morally wrong, whether competent, incompetent, he is the only one that attempted to do anything about removing Castro. After JFK's death, I don't believe there was ever the slightest attempt, covert or overt or anything, to remove Castro by any subsequent president. The Miami community was manipulated by, Nixon and Reagan and Republicans in general to think that they'd do something about it. They wouldn't. But Miami Cubans, especially, we're talking 70s, 80s, 90s, very Republican, very right wing, and I could see metaphoric, just the vibe in the air in Miami, and we're talking now 10 years after the assassination and forwards. I could see how that would, something like that could have been hatched. So I came to the conclusion at a certain point, maybe in my early adulthood and through my 20s, that this was possible, that it was possible. I had witnessed the hatred. I had heard the hatred. Now, my parents did not participate in that. They were appalled. They loved JFK. But it was a right-wing community in Miami, and they were killing each other. A former Cuban senator, I remember these names, Torriente, shot in the head while watching TV. Another, I believe he might have been also a former Cuban senator back in Batista's time, Mas Ferrer. He was blown to bits one morning in the 70s in Miami. Again, I was a square kid, and I listened to this very courageous Cuban American who had a radio show, a very popular radio show in Miami in the evening, starting like at 10, a very moderate voice. And this man, Emilio Milian, a Cuban American broadcaster, one day after his radio show, and I had listened that night, he gets in his car and it blows up, and his legs were blown away. Luckily, he survived, and he lived another 20 years or so. But that broke my heart. That broke my heart to know that Emilio Milian had been blown, his legs had been blown off like that. I just as I said previously, I could see how such a plan to remove JFK could have been hatched in Miami by Cuban exiles and disgruntled Cuban quote-unquote patriots, brigade members, and their CIA connections. However, I do not believe that happened. I believe there were many, many, many happy Cuban exiles in Miami the day JFK died. But I don't believe they were involved, though, in the end.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to, given the environment you grew up in, to see that hatred and to think these people could have mentally done it, but to have actually pulled off a cover-up is a completely different thing.
I agree now. Now, don't forget, I'll add this. I guess I'm saying that I have empathy for, I imagine you much less or not at all, but I have empathy for people that sincerely say, hey, wait a minute. There could have been a conspiracy. I was there once. How can I not have empathy? But I must point out that the Watergate break-in and the people brought in that next morning before a judge, as it's portrayed in All the President's Men, the book and the movie. I don't know. There were 6 or 7 of them, and they were mostly Cuban exiles, basically working with the CIA. There is absolutely no doubt that vibe, again, was there, but they did not get to him. It was too risky. It was simply too risky, too complicated, and anybody that conspired would want a guarantee of getting away with it, obviously. And I don't believe there's a way to get away with it. Certainly not long term. But again,
Right.
I do empathize a little bit with people that sincerely have some level of belief. I would urge them that there was a conspiracy. I would urge them, of course, to to study further.
Right.
There's so much ignorance, and I guess that's why I admire you. You're a young man. You put yourself out there. I'm sure you've gotten ridicule. I hope you haven't gotten harassment or threats or anything. I don't know. I hope not. But you put yourself out there in what is essentially an unpopular cause, the cause of assuring facts and searching for the truth. So anyway, forgive me if I've been wordy or gone off on a soapbox here.
No, it's been fun. I appreciate your point of view. To answer your kind of question there, I haven't received too much. I've received a lot of negativity. Like if you look at the reviews of my film online, it's either people love it or hate it, and the people who hate it are the people who are very invested in the conspiracy stuff. But the only person who really threatened me is actually Roger Stone, who is one of the conspiracy theorists that I deal with in the film, and who is an advisor to President Trump. And on Twitter, he got mad at me one day because I countered something that he said and said, people should see my film, see, how I debunk him. And he got mad at me saying that my film is junk and I'm not a real filmmaker and blah, blah, blah. And then he said, I should come to Minneapolis and punish you.
That is amazing. He's in a hot seat right now. Possibly he'll be interviewed, depending on what happens. I'm sure there's a division in the House Intelligence Committee between Nunes and Schiff, if I believe the names are. Nunes seems to be a lackey for Trump. But have you brought this to the media or anything? I mean, this Roger Stone is a lowlife. He is an absolute fraud and an absolute lowlife, a political operative of the lowest level who enriches himself by doing things that no mother and no father would ever want their kids to do. Again, I mentioned kids. You have kids, I have kids. You want your kids to have some sense that either the world is stable and safe, which of course, in time they learn it's not perfectly stable or safe. Of course not. I don't want to lie to them. But that when it is not safe or stable, there are corrective measures in the works, that the adults actually address it, justice, fairness. And people like Stone are basically on the opposite side. I mean, I hate to say this, but we have a person in the White House right now that is on the opposite side. They do not care. They want to stir things up. They want to frighten people, fear-mongering, reality divorced from facts. They do not want the populace to be intelligent. They do not want the populace to be good citizens, informed in civics. It's really quite amazing. And I think kids need to know that people are good. Not black and white. I'm not like that at all. If you got to know me, you'd know. I mean, I'm a psychotherapist, we're going to say. There are all kinds of nuances. People are mixed bags. In fact, if you divide them into good and bad too extremely, that's actually part of a personality disorder, which our president probably has, called borderline personality disorder, aside from the other things he's got going. But kids want to know, in general, that people are good, and if they're not good, that they will be brought to justice. Oswald was brought to justice, and kids should know that. He did this bad thing on a simple level, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds, later more sophisticated as they get older. We've looked at it carefully. He should not have been shot. That actually contributed to the craziness. But, we got the guy. we got the guy. There aren't these people that went off and lived happily ever after killing the president. And that's where I think I told you at one point on Facebook that I hope your kids one day appreciate the work you're doing. Visit listen to some of your podcasts and so forth. But what can you do? What can you do except put one foot in front of the other and restate your case? And we'll see. There's a real battle now between the irrational and the rational. And if there's anything that President Kennedy stood for, it was for rationality. He was very, very disturbed by the irrational nature of human beings, which could lead, in his view, and accurately so, to the destruction of the planet in a thermonuclear war. So in the man's memory, let's be rational. No one would want more than me, I'm sure you, if there were others involved to get them, because, again, that would serve justice. But it doesn't serve justice to have the one guy that did it seen as a patsy and because he said so, oh my goodness, and innocent, and these faceless conspirators got away with it. I don't think that's cool.
Talking with Mariano renewed my hope that my work can make an impact and people can pull themselves back from the abyss, which I've been doubtful about recently. I look forward to hearing from more men and women like him in the future. Join me next time when I'll be talking with playwright Jeremiah Miller about his new work, The Guilty Parties of New Orleans.
Thank you for listening to This Must Be the Podcast. Our host is James K. Lambert. Our music was composed by Steve Yeager, and I'm the announcer, Keith Kopatz. This Must Be the Podcast is a JamesKLambert.com production.
But I think I was a little too unfocused and a little too all over the place. I'll listen to it later. I'll probably cringe at the sound of my own voice. But honestly, what do you think? You think it was okay?
Oh, yeah. I think you spoke clearly and you made good points. And I don't think you'll be embarrassed at all with what you had to say.
Right. Thank you, sir. I guess I'll let you go now. Finally, you're free.